Last week, we talked about the sensual emotions. The sensual emotions that are tied to the pleasure and pain centers of the brain. To perceive pleasure is to feel glad. To perceive pain or loss of pleasure is to feel sad. To anticipate pain or loss of pleasure is to feel scared. And to anticipate pleasure is to feel desire. These emotions are automatic. They interrupt our thought. They start in the limbic system. The thinking cortex of the brain is unnecessary. Thinking rationalizes sensual emotions and tries to make them go away or justify them. Today, we are talking about moral emotions. This is a different class of emotions. Moral emotions require thought. Throughout our lives, we develop theories of what should and should not be. On a basic behavioral psychology, operant conditioning level, different behaviors that we randomly do elicit pleasure and pain. And our brain tries to detect patterns so that we can increase our pleasure and decrease our pain, so we can make our world more predictable. We like predictability. We become attached to it. Predictability is right, and change is wrong. And one of the things that brings most humans pleasure and predictability is belonging to a social group. It decreases our autonomy, but it does, in the long run, increase our survivability. We learn the norms of a social group, a group of shoulds and should nots. These are supported by the group. A fulfillment of a desire, though personally pleasure, might result in punishment from a group. Our thinking cortex is constantly calculating the balance between personal pleasure and the pleasure of belonging to the group. When the balance is equal for everyone, there is equity. And when things are out of balance, there is inequity. An old English word for sin is iniquity. It's related to the word inequity. Iniquity. Now, in the New International Version of the Bible, a recent translation, iniquity is used only 13 times. But in the King James Bible, iniquity is used 262 times. And I like the term iniquity because it makes me think of inequality. And I like it better than the idea of sin, the modern translation, which is more often defined as breaking a rule. The New International Version translation makes God seem unfair when it states in Numbers 14:18, He punishes the children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. If sin is merely breaking a rule, this is unjust because people are being punished for sins that they did not commit. And you hear this in our social discourse. Whites sometimes become indignant when blacks mention slavery, stating, "It's not fair to hold me guilty of a crime I didn't commit." But hear that verse again in the King James Version. The Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. The iniquity of our forefathers, the inequality of slavery and of Jim Crow, has been visited upon succeeding generations. Racism is the swamp of iniquity that we are floating in. Sexism is the swamp of iniquity that we are swimming in. Personal prejudice, personal sin are beside the point. Personal piety, making sure that you are pure and you don't have these prejudices, is fine, but it's like building a submarine. It merely helps you feel clean as you continue to float in the swamp of iniquity. We can try to wash our hands like Pontius Pilate, but we still live in the atmosphere of iniquity. Pompous piety does not wash away iniquity. Moral emotions arise when we perceive or anticipate inequity. Moral emotions occur when our thoughts about justice are violated. When we perceive justice, perceived injustice leads to anger. Anticipated justice leads to hope. Anticipated injustice leads to self-righteousness. And perceived justice is grace. I begin with anger. Perceived injustice leads to anger. And there seems to be a lot of free-floating anger around our nation at this time. But I wonder if it's really anger. Because other things often look like anger. Fear can look like anger. As we talked last week, fear leads to the fight or flight response. Once a fight begins, it looks like anger. There's yelling, there's punching, there's all these things. A cornered dog is frightened and dangerous, and it looks angry, but it's really fearful, and it's not connected to a higher purpose. Desire can look like anger. When you really want something, it can look like anger. You watch sports, you can see it on the face of the competitors. They look angry. And the lust on a lover's face can look like anger. If you stopped and took a picture of it, I wouldn't recommend it, probably break the mood. But you know what I'm talking about, if you're lucky. The grumpiness of someone who just needs some sleep can look like anger. Intensity and yelling, even from the pulpit, can look like anger. But it's merely a strategy for fulfilling a want. Anger, as I'm describing it in this sermon, it's specific. Anger is a result of a basic human rights violation. It is tied to a basic human need that everyone should have. There's a saying, don't get mad, get even. Now, this is usually a call for vengeance, but I like to turn this on its head in the sense that getting even means getting balanced. Balance what you want with what is needed. Because sometimes we say it isn't fair, and sometimes what we really mean is I'm not getting what I want. My desire is not being met. But sometimes our desires not being met line up with desires that should be met for everyone. Let's say I have a plate of food and a beggar stops by and asks for some. My sensual desire yells, "Mine!" But my moral judgment may lead me to share according to need. Desire is personal. Anger is universal. Desire makes me not myself when I'm hungry. And advertisements tell me that can be fixed by a Snickers bar. But anger occurs when I realize that the universal human need for food is not being met. True anger leads to action larger than oneself. Otherwise, it is just selfish desire. Some people will boo because they don't want to hear a candidate's name. That is desire. Booing feels really good in the moment. Boo! But the angry response is, don't boo, vote. Anger at injustice leads to an action towards justice. So when you're upset, ask yourself, is it fear? Am I having a visceral fight response? Is it desire? Am I having a tantrum because everything's not going my way? Or is it anger? Is it anger? Is this connected to something that is basic to my rights and the rights of every human being on the planet? Fear and desire have their purpose. They are basic to our survival. But only anger pushes one towards justice. And this is where I try to catch myself. Sometimes I get caught up in wordplay because I think it's fun. And then sometimes I get frustrated because I think that it's just semantics and you can get tied up in a thing where it's just words and words don't really mean anything. But sometimes they really do. And this is why, just this morning, as I was reading this sermon, I made the decision to write this down in pencil at the base of this sermon. From this day forward, I'm going to refuse to fight for justice. I do not want to fight for justice because fighting is a fear response. A fight means that I want to destroy my opponent. And destroying another person cannot be just. But I will continue to work for justice, working to include the opponent, even the opponent that I might fear, even an opponent that I might be angry at. I need to work. Justice is work. It's not a fight. It's not enough to win an election. Elections come and go. There's a long-term work that needs to be done so that we can have a sustainable community after elections and so that we can build a better future. So anger pushes one towards justice. But I find it's not all that sustaining. I find sometimes I need to be pulled towards justice. If one anticipates justice, one has hope. One has to believe that justice is possible. In the words of Gandhi, it is possible to live in peace. I love that phrase. I have seen very little evidence that that's true. But boy, it's an act of faith. I say it, and I hope that it's true. And something about those words, hearing those words, it is possible to live in peace, gives me courage. Gives me courage to overcome fear. It sustains me when battles are lost, when there's war after war that I protest and the war continues anyway. But that hope, that belief gives me the courage to continue. Lincoln said, "Let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith, let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it." For some, that faith is in God. For some, that faith is in humanity, or some great principles such as peace, or justice, or beauty. Something that says, yes, it's worth it. It's worth it to create and continue. All of us are capable of doing great things whenever something pulls us beyond ourselves. But what if someone does not believe in equity and justice? This results in self-righteousness. Think of it. Any true believer in God should believe that God is willing to bring justice. To kill in the name of God makes no sense. It shows that one believes that God is too weak to bring justice. Somehow one appoints themselves to kill for God, or cynically some vulnerable persons to carry out the hit. Generals, politicians, and terrorist leaders have long used this strategy. There are people who only seek vengeance. They think there is no justice, They say, I feel pain, I'm going to kill myself, and I'm going to take down as many people as I can with me. But there are also psychopaths that believe that they or their kind actually are more equal than others. There isn't equity, there isn't order, and they belong at the top. The lower classes have no right to complain. The rabble must be kept down where they belong. People need to be excluded rather than included. We are allowed to torture them because they torture us. There is no higher standard that we have to hold ourselves to. Self-righteousness does not seek justice, it seeks vengeance. It seeks only personal victory. Victory can come at any cost. There are no rules, or if there are rules, special exceptions are made for me. Self-righteousness rejects altruism. It believes that everyone does and should act for oneself. Do unto others only what is good for oneself. Which leads me to grace. Perceived justice is grace. When we're in a position to extend mercy, we're being gracious. When we receive mercy, we should be grateful. But grace is very elusive. I find myself in my sensual emotions often feeling sad because I see all the losses around. On my moral, emotional level, I feel angry because I think those losses need to be corrected. I would love to live in a state of grace. Being able to have mercy upon those who are taking a wrong path. In harmony with ultimate justice, so that I could go straight to ethical action without getting so angry in the meantime. So I could just know that my altruism is not just selfishness in disguise, that I am really acting on the behalf of all and not just rationalizing my personal wants and trying to make them seem more noble than they really are. I wish I could live in a state of grace so I could live without fear, knowing that those things that attack me are mostly aspects of myself, that they are part of the human condition, that I should be able to understand better than I do. I wish I could live in a state of grace so I could be truly grateful for all that I have received, rather than just go by day taking things for granted as if I deserve them. I wish I could live in a state of grace so that I could let things go without grief. knowing full well that people come in and out of my life. That is the way of life. We can enjoy each other and be grateful, and be gratefully let each other go when it's time. I wish I could live in a state of grace so that I could satisfy my desires without harming others, and so that all of my hopes could be lived as truth. There have been moments when I have seen the mountaintop through the clouds. I have looked through the mirror dimly. At times I have felt the reassuring embrace of all that is sacred. I have heard the echoes of creation ringing in my ears, singing a siren song guiding me to safe harbor. The fragrance of flowers, the flavors of food hint at what is and what could be. But it is difficult to know what true justice is. And I also know that it is possible that there is no justice. So I make a choice. I choose to believe in equity. It somehow pleases my sensual emotions. Having moral emotions gives me a reason to live. Searching for equity saves us from iniquity. May we bless and be blessed.